Picture a sweltering July afternoon in 1518. On a cobblestone street in the city of Strasbourg, a woman known as Frau Trophäa steps out of her front door and begins a relentless, agonizing jig. She has no musical accompaniment, and she is entirely silent. Her face is twisted in agony, her arms thrashing violently as she jumps awkwardly from foot to foot. Her husband begs her to stop, but it is as if she cannot even hear him. She dances until her feet bleed, keeping this up for nearly a week. The only pause comes when her body completely gives out, sinking into a brief, exhausted sleep, before her eyes dart open and the frantic twitching takes over once more. These citizens became prisoners within their own bodies, driven by a frantic rhythm that pushed them to move until their hearts simply gave out. Strasbourg was a bustling hub in the Holy Roman Empire, a city defined by the immense authority of the Church. But in the summer of 1518, its streets transformed into an absolute nightmare. The madness proved contagious. Within a week, Frau Trophäa's solitary compulsion swept up 30 people. By August, as many as 400 citizens were consumed by the same frenzy. They filled the markets and the narrow alleyways, moving with a demented fury. The dancers were terrified, their vacant eyes staring straight ahead as they cried out for mercy. There are hard biological limits to what the human body can endure under continuous aerobic exertion. People began to drop in the blistering heat. At the peak of the horror, reports claimed up to 15 citizens were dying every single day from massive heart attacks, strokes, and pure physical exhaustion. Paralyzed city authorities scrambled for an explanation as they watched their population drop dead. They were desperate to identify the invisible force that was hijacking these bodies and marching them toward their deaths. Officials initially turned to local physicians for a diagnosis based on medical theories of the time. They believed the afflicted suffered from hot blood, an overheating of the brain from imbalanced humors. The doctors believed the only way to save the victims was to force them to dance. Officials ordered the construction of wooden stages in public squares and hired drummers, pipers, and horns to provide a relentless soundtrack. The infectious rhythm acted like fuel on a raging fire. The music attracted more onlookers, who were quickly swallowed up by the psychological contagion, joining the mass of bleeding, screaming dancers. Realizing their massive blunder, the panicked city council abruptly silenced the music, banned public dancing, and concluded Strasbourg was under a terrifying curse. A wave of religious terror washed over the city. Authorities concluded the people were suffering the wrath of Saint Vitus, a martyred saint believed to punish sinners by forcing them to dance uncontrollably. Desperate officials carted the survivors to a remote mountain shrine. In a ritual designed to cleanse the city, the victims were handed small crosses and fitted with red shoes painted with crosses and sprinkled with holy water. Whether it was isolation or psychological relief from the ritual, the movements finally began to slow. However, the authorities' belief in a supernatural culprit masked the true cause of the mania. For centuries, the events of 1518 remained one of the most chilling mysteries of human history. Modern researchers have often pointed to the food supply as a potential biological suspect. One theory suggests victims ingested ergot, a toxic fungus growing on damp rye stalks that acts similarly to LSD, causing severe hallucinations. However, ergot poisoning physically restricts blood flow to the extremities, causing severe muscle weakness and intense pain. This restriction of circulation would make it biologically impossible for a victim to even stand, let alone sustain days of rigorous aerobic dancing. Because the human body cannot maintain high-intensity movement while blood flow is physically constricted, the cause of the marathon in Strasbourg cannot be found in a poisoned loaf of bread. The explanation lies instead in the depths of the human mind. Psychologists believe the citizens were victims of mass psychogenic illness. This phenomenon occurs when physical symptoms spread rapidly through a population, with no underlying biological contagion, triggered by an unimaginable level of psychological trauma. The region in 1518 was a time of absolute despair. The population had been battered by a string of brutal famines, soaring grain prices, and freezing winters that made starvation a daily reality. This was compounded by the arrival of syphilis and the constant threat of the Black Death, all occurring under a church that preached these horrors were direct punishments for the sins of the people. To this atmosphere of starvation and disease, add the terror of the supernatural. The population lived in the shadow of events like the Ensisheim meteorite crash, which many interpreted as a literal warning shot from the heavens. Starved, exhausted, and living in paralyzing fear, the people of Strasbourg were trapped in a psychological pressure cooker. Their community was primed for a collective break from reality. When the mind is trapped by this level of trauma, it can slip into a dissociative trance, losing conscious control over the body. Frau Trophia's initial personal breakdown acted as a spark in a community already drowning in misery, causing the psychological contagion to spread like wildfire. A deeply ingrained belief in the curse of St. Vitus provided the framework for this trauma to manifest. Because the people truly expected to be punished by being forced to dance, their minds made it a physical reality. The events of 1518 demonstrate the physical power of a collective cultural belief, where a community's shared expectation of a curse manifests as a loss of motor control. The dancing plague is a reminder that when despair becomes unbearable, the human mind can force the body into the streets, seizing total control until the very end.